point. He's a James Beard semi-finalist. The restaurant here in St. Louis is named Bulrush. He also had an award-winning restaurant in New Mexico for about a decade called the something kumquat. The Curious.
The Curious.
The Curious.
The something kumquat's a good name too, though.
Yeah, yes. So you might get a chance to ask about that. He's a self-taught chef, which is the best kind. And he does a lot of serious and studious research to inform his work as a chef. So please welcome Rob Connoley.
So I was hearing an echo. Can you all hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So thank you for the introduction. Thanks for coming out, and be safe going home, please. All right, thanks everybody. All right, so we can do this. And I want you to know that I love questions. You won't distract me by asking questions in the middle. I have a lot of slides, and just because I like to capture, the title itself tells you why I have a lot of slides. There's a lot of thought that went into this restaurant, and part of it is the 10 years of my previous restaurant, what I liked and what I didn't like, and then having a gap of 3 years waiting for my building here in St. Louis to come to fruition. That gave me even more time to ponder things in my head about, again, what I liked and didn't like, especially when I would eat out. And a little more about me, very briefly, is that I have a doctorate from Purdue in sports psychology. It has nothing to do with anything, except that I'm definitely a researcher at heart. You can't leave Purdue and not be a researcher or a business person. And so I dig very deep into the topics that interest me when they interest me, and then I move on. That's why this is career number 3 for me. This one I'm digging pretty deep on, though, because I was raised in a family from St. Genevieve, many generations. We've had a cabin down in the Ozarks since the 30s, and we never talked about it as the Ozarks. To us, it was just our life. And I think many people in the Ozarks live that same life. To me, we're on a peripheral part of the Ozarks versus like Eminence, where those folks take it serious. And so taking this time now as an adult to look back at those childhood memories and experiences and add some academic rigor to it has been really fascinating. But at the end of the day, I'm just trying to put out food that is good for the customers. So again, stop me at any point and ask questions, but we're going to run through some slides here. What we do is we focus on 1820 to 1870. Why those dates? It's somewhat arbitrary. The 1820 is easy because that's the oldest document I've laid my hands on. We don't do textbook research at all. I don't do digital research. That's not true. We do, but then we go and lay hands on the original documents because it's about connection with that individual, connection with their stories. And so that's why 1820. That number I know will change, and it's going to change very quickly because we've been given access to a few more archives. And so we have a history intern from SLU. He and I do most of this work. And so we know that number is going to change. 1870 is very arbitrary. That's the industrial age. That's when the trains really got down into the Ozarks. That's when mass communication, newspapers and such started to infiltrate into the Ozarks, meaning if I had a family scrapbook from the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, and then all of a sudden there's newspaper clippings in the scrapbook. All of a sudden, it's not that information is not valuable, it's just less pure. It's not as easy for me to do my work when I can't tell what's Ozark and what's Boston. So that's why that date. And then the technical answer of what is Ozark cuisine, it's the cuisine, the foodways, the food traditions of the Ozark Plateau. That's the technical answer. My more direct answer is it's capturing the stories of the people who lived in the Ozarks and giving it a new life in a modern era. So this is what my brain looks like. I always have to get it out. I have a whiteboard at work. I have 5 whiteboards. This particular one is the macro level stuff, the philosophic thoughts, the organizational structures that I just need to somehow get onto paper or onto a board. And I've chosen a whiteboard because I can add and delete and whatever. I know you can't read that, but you'll get to in a moment. So very quickly, I'm Bridgeton, born and raised, St. Genevieve roots, cabin in the Mark Twain National Forest. My last restaurant was the Something Kumquat. And I came home in 2016 after being in New Mexico for 18 years and being gone 30 years, just because my mom was at an age, it's time to come back. While I was in New Mexico, that was when I opened my first restaurant, my last restaurant. And it's the only time I had ever worked in a restaurant at that point. As a kid, I never was a dishwasher. It just wasn't part of my world. And so everything I learned, or all the thoughts I developed about running a restaurant, came from that experience. And that restaurant was in the middle of the Gila National Wilderness. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but it's a wilderness that's bigger than the state of Delaware. It's extremely remote. We're 3 hours to an airport, 5 hours to a major city, and a little town of 8 to 10,000, depending on time of year. You could not accidentally get there. You had to go out of your way to get to it. It was in the high desert. That meant there wasn't a whole lot of farmers. There wasn't a whole lot of food. So I had to learn how to create a restaurant with that background. That gave me an appreciation for the ranchers and farmers in the area, the few that we did have, and the life that they raised. The very first non-plant that I got from a rancher, I was invited to a goat sale. That's not my world, but it was a 4-H goat sale. I show up on the side of the highway near the rodeo grounds. Here's all these goats in a pen and all these little kids circling the pen, picking out their goat to take home. And I thought, oh, well, that's great, the connection with their food. And so I'm looking differently. They're looking for the cutest one. I'm looking for the plumpest one. And this one, he comes over to me. I poke him. I'm like, well, I think that's a good goat. I've never bought a goat. And so I register it and put it back on the truck with the tag. And I later learned I was the only one there for meat. Everyone else there was for milk or grazing or whatever. And so the connection to food really started at that point for me. And I learned to not do that in front of the little kids anymore. I also learned the value of forage. So forage is when we go out in the woods, gather ingredients and bring them back and cook. So this is before Ozarks were part of my mind. Here it was just, how do I get food for my restaurant that's fresh in a world that lives on Cisco truck food? And foraging was one option for me. I also have been a student, even before this, of restaurant trends, like what restaurants influence another restaurant and influence another, and how a chef will have a team of sous chefs and line cooks that then go on to do other things and how they're influenced. It's just fascinating to me watching how trends travel internationally now. Good example for anyone who's into restaurants, El Bulli in Catalan, Spain. It's a political statement if anyone's into that battle. But anyway, El Bulli was the restaurant that started the hyper-modernist movement, the molecular gastronomy movement. In the US, then French Laundry, Linea were the disciples, and then they put out students. And so it's just fascinating. And then last thing, I'm not big on following what other people do. We are rarely truly original, but I don't like just regurgitating what a mentor told me to do, or taking a cookbook and presenting that food, because it's just not exciting to me. I would rather go on untreaded waters and see what happens and risk failure. Okay, so let's start breaking down that whiteboard as a way for you to see how I think. And I had to translate my notes, one, because I have terrible writing, and two, everything's spelled correctly. I just want you to know that. You just can't read the correct spelling. Because that word in the middle is not forage, it is forage. It's just, I have a doctoral signature, and so I skip letters every now and then. But In the world of foraging, or in my thought process of foraging, I think constantly about the concept of native versus invasive plants. We want to eat the natives, and we want to eat the invasives because we want to get them away from the natives. So thinking in those terms is really useful for me. I think constantly about flavor diversity and how that can expand a customer's experience. Right now I'm serving celery root. That's so pedestrian to me, and I would say 60% of our customers have never heard of celery root, especially if I call it celeriac. So I'd like to expand people's experiences. Land stewardship is really important to me, whether it's public land or private land. Making sure, this is my Boy Scout times, I like to make sure the land is in better shape when I leave than when I got there. So we always haul out trash, and we can do a little bit of horticultural cultivation, being careful to not break the Star Trek Prime Directive. I don't want to get too geeky on you, but we don't want to change the world, but we want to support it so it can do its thing. Also, the value of tradition. I can't talk about history where I ignore the indigenous people, the enslaved people, the ancestors who settled the land, and capturing that tradition in a way that makes sense or is a good tale for modern times. Land health, which is part of land stewardship. Uniqueness is a real important part of forage for me. Why do I serve you acorn? Because you've probably never eaten acorn, and it's really good. Trust in sourcing is crucial to me, and we're going to talk about this more in a bit, but there's so much fraud and deception in the food world, not just the restaurant world, not just the farmer world. There's all sorts of books and studies out there right now. If anyone's interested in this, I'm happy to give you some names to follow up on. Fish that are sold is one thing, but genetic testing tells us it's something totally different. It's rampant right now. Why? Because it's the almighty dollar. You can sell a dirt cheap fish as a fancy fish because when the chef gets it, it's a rectangular fillet, and they don't know the difference. I know I wouldn't. A white flaky fish is a white flaky fish, and that's extremely common. There's a book that came out that talked about you are not eating Gulf shrimp. And I'm like, what do you mean? I see them everywhere, especially here. I see them at the grocery stores, at my distributors. And I always remember that article, and I think, yeah, I'm probably not eating Gulf shrimp. I'm eating Asian shrimp marketed as Gulf shrimp. So it's important for me to gather my own ingredients. That way I know exactly what I've got. And then the last is connection to time and place. That's what this restaurant's all about. So for us with foraging, we gather about 75 ingredients per year and do all sorts of stuff with them. We mostly work on private land, a little bit on public land if we've been given access. We have some really cool access. Like we've been allowed to forage out at Shaw Nature Reserve. You can't even pick a flower at Shaw. But again, they know how we treat the land, and they know that we integrate education into everything we do. So people will walk by us as we're snipping sumac, and they'll say, well, what are you doing? And we'll talk to them about native invasive and all these other things. We never purchase forage. It's the same thing I was talking about. There's rampant fraud. And actually more than that, it's the ethics of gathering. People who will go on private land, people who will steal plants that are, again, on private land. So we just don't purchase it. And I like the creativity that's forced by being hyper seasonal. So right now, as the snow is coming down, what can I forage? Anybody have an idea? Because my sous chef is out right now gathering things.
Persimmons?
Persimmons are still out there, absolutely. There's a tree that I foraged the second week of December last year because they still hadn't dropped. He's out right now trying to find any island that the water's low enough that he can get onto for oyster mushrooms. Oyster mushrooms are all over right now. I'm not telling you where, but they're out there. If anyone can't tell, the picture in the center, that's pawpaw. Those are just mixed wild berries that we gathered. And then I put this picture on the left because this is Schnucks. I shop at Schnucks. Schnucks is fine. I live in the city, so I don't really get access to Deerbergs. But I thought it was interesting. I walked in and it said loyal to local. And then the very next sign in corn season was Colorado corn. I know Colorado corn's a thing. You know, it's like a Georgia peach. And I also know we have a lot of corn raised in this area that's really good. So is Colorado corn that good that we need it? You know, these are my issues. You can get your Colorado corn. I just thought the juxtaposition was really interesting. So this one's shorter. It may be shorter on my whiteboard, but it's not in our kitchen practice. We do zero waste. What does that mean? Food doesn't go out the back door in the trash. We as a restaurant are still averaging, after 7 months of being open, 5 gallons of food waste trash a week. That's ridiculous. I was going to say you probably do that at home, but that may not be true. A restaurant normally would go through a huge 22-gallon trash can a night. We serve appropriate portions to our customers. No, that doesn't mean so small you leave hungry. It means that over the years, I know what people will eat, and I know how to up portions or down portions, so it's the right amount. At least I like to think so. But the other thing is, every time we peel a vegetable, every time we core an apple, something's going to be done with that. It never goes in the trash. And we'll either try to do, I say 2 to 3 times use of the same ingredient. We'll reuse things over, and I'll give you an example of that. Or I make things that I can send up to my bar. This is easy in a restaurant. It's easier with the staff. But let me give you one example. When we first opened back in April, I wanted a sweet potato caramel. You know when sweet potatoes are baked and they drip and they burn on the bottom of your oven? Well, that liquid is the water with the sugar from the sweet potatoes. So I would take 9 pounds of sweet potatoes, put them in my roaster, cover them so they don't dehydrate, roast them, and gather all that liquid and then boil it down. 9 pounds gave me 1/3 of a cup of caramel. It's good caramel, okay? And we're a fancy restaurant, so it seemed to make sense at the time. And I did that once, and I had 9 pounds of sweet potatoes. I just threw them in the cooler and let them sit. And then the next week I did it again. All of a sudden I had 18 pounds of sweet potatoes. And now it's one of those kill your darlings. I said, okay, this is not smart. What am I going to do with 18 pounds of roasted sweet potatoes? So I put them in a huge stock pot. Okay, so that's use number 1. Filled it with water, boiled it for a good hour, took all that liquid, drained it. I still have the sweet potatoes, by the way. Took that water, ran it through our centrifuge. We have a centrifuge that we use for the bar, which clarifies it, sent that roasted sweet potato water to the bar and said, make a cocktail using that. It was delicious. It was a huge hit. Some bourbon, something or other. That's great. That's use 2. I still have those sweet potatoes. And so we do, you'll see in a second, a lot with koji. I'll explain that. And koji is what makes miso and amino acids. We took the sweet potato, tossed it with our house-made, house-grown koji, and now we have a roasted sweet potato amino acid. Think of it as a sweet potato miso that we can use to flavor things. At that point, I stopped the caramel because I could never keep up with the waste at that point. We still have some like 12 pounds of the sweet potato amino acid, and people eat it every night. We don't talk about it, but it's in food, and it's a great flavor. So here's some of the things we do: vinegars, ashes, misos, amino acids, infusions, tinctures. And then for me, the final step, which I consider failure, is if it goes to compost. That means we've missed the mark somewhere. It's okay if it goes to compost. It's my apartment. We have a community garden. I don't know if my neighbors realize why we have so much compost. You know, I dump a 5-gallon bucket every week, but that's why. But to me, that is a failure. I think there's probably something more we could have done. Corn season pushed our limits because every ear of corn that we shucked, it's like, okay, well, we're going to make a corn husk ash. All right, we're going to take that corn husk and make tamales. And then, now what? Okay, I'm going to candy the threads. I'm going to dehydrate and fry the threads. You can only do so much when you're doing 100 pounds of corn a week. That one pushed us, but that all went to compost. So you don't need to see all these details. This was our list about a month ago of active projects that we do for all these second and third uses of ingredients. And it just gives you a sense. It has a ton of stuff in here that's foraged as well. There's so much I had to build a spreadsheet because I couldn't keep track of all this stuff. Just keeps going and going and going. I mean, come on, goofy things like cantaloupe preserved in koji oil. I don't even know what that is. My sous chef drives a lot of that process. So within all of that, we do a ton of fermentation. This is where we start thinking more Ozarkian or 19th century. They wouldn't have said, oh, let's ferment. They're preserving. How do you preserve? Well, there's a lot of different ways. And for us, it gives us storage and preservation for the cold months. And it also creates flavors that are new to you. There are restaurants in town who push this really hard. And to me, I'm much more about giving you a good meal instead of doing something just to impress you. And we're very careful on how we present fermentation, and we try not to talk about it too much unless we think it's integral to the dish. And as I mentioned, koji. So what is koji? It's that picture on the bottom. It's a white fuzz. It's fungus. We grow it in-house on rice. You take warm rice, you inoculate it with the koji spores, grow it in a hot or warm, humid environment, and then that breaks down ingredients. So you know koji because that's how we get sake, soy sauce, miso, tempeh. All those are koji projects. And we do that in-house with goofy stuff that is more Missouri and Ozark. Okay, locavore is another philosophy for us. That's all about economics, making sure our local farmers survive, making sure the small farmers have a living versus the big farmers. And I can tell you that's really hard as a restaurant because I can call the Heckemeyer farm and they can have 20 ingredients to me tomorrow, or Grown and Gathered farm up in Alton who delivers once a week, maybe if their kid's not busy and they only have 4 or 5 vegetables. We always want to work with the small farmers. That's not easy to do all the time. We want to encourage organic and heritage farming, and I'll come back to that. I like ingredient options. That has to do with flavor diversity, and then the agri-health of biodiversity. So quick story that hasn't happened yet. It's going to happen tomorrow. I went to the St. Louis chapter of the National Archivist Association. Woo, what fun. And I make fun of it because I work with archivists all the time. I can't imagine what they do at their meetings. But I was invited there by the St. Louis archivist. And I showed up and I didn't know anyone. I'm not shy at all. But when I'm in a meeting where I don't know anyone and everyone else knows each other, I kind of just sat down on the side waiting for the meeting to happen. And this guy came over to me and he introduced himself as the lead archivist for the City of St. Louis Recorder of Deeds Office. I don't want to make fun of it.
You do.
But I kind of do because I thought that has got to be the most boring job ever. And then I told him what I did and he said, oh, well, 2 weeks ago, I was flipping through some old boxes and I found a bankruptcy proceeding from a seed store from 1837. And it had the inventory for the valuation of the business. Now he's got my interest. And I said, well, it just said like corn seed, right? He said, no. It said corn and the 20 varieties of corn that they had in stock when they went bankrupt. That's a gold mine. I get a copy of that tomorrow. I don't know if that's exciting to you, but I can't imagine anything more exciting than that because I'm now able to go to the various seed banks around the country with a list of very specific seeds to see who has any of these that still exist. And I already have farmers who said they can't wait to grow things for me and I can get those seeds to the farmers. And what does that do? That takes a snapshot in time and puts it back in the field. Because over 200 years, we've gotten rid of much of that stuff. Not everything, but much of it because, well, maybe it's pests, maybe it's just fashion, maybe it was too seedy. Big Ag brought in a seed and pushed it into a community that drove out these heirloom seeds. And we're going to be able to bring all that back 200 years later. That's really exciting. And I get that list tomorrow. So, but I want to then back up and say in New Mexico, I came to the realization that just because it's local doesn't mean it's good. I've had many things grown by local farmers that just aren't good. And if I give it to a customer, then we may have done more harm than good by trying to push that philosophy. The Farm to Fable, has anyone read that essay? As an expose, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago now. It was a writer in Tampa, Orlando, Laura Riley. She was the food critic there. She went to the 200 restaurants in her district that identify as locavore, farm to table, or anything like that. And she documented everything that they said on a chalkboard, a menu, something a waiter might have said, their website, anything where they talk about, we got the produce from this farmer, the seafood from this fisher person, this meat from this rancher. She documented it all. Then she contacted each of those farmers, fishermen, ranchers, and of the 200 or so restaurants, how many do you think were telling complete truth? 7. That was one of the most impactful things I've read in my chef professional life. That's when I started realizing just how bad this problem was. It's not just that you as the consumer are being duped and charged for the dupedness. It's also these farmers, fishermen, ranchers that their name is being used for someone else to make money and they're struggling to survive. This is what locavore means to me. This is why we are 100% locally sourced, minus fat, salt, and sugar, because those aren't around here. We're working on the salt. That one's hard though. But everything else, our flours, every vegetable, every meat, that's why we do it. We need the economic system to keep flowing. Another one that's more for me, and this is actually why I came up with the title of this presentation, From Gripe to Gullet, is redefining fine dining. My life before chefing was writing the big federal grants for health-related stuff. If anyone knows that world, I did mostly SAMHSA grants, the multi-year, multi-million-dollar grants. And so I would go to DC or LA or Chicago very often, and I would take my per diem and stay at a cheap hotel, get the free breakfast, skip lunch, and then do a $100, $200 dinner at night. It's how I like to spend my money. And so I have a very opinionated perspective on how fine dining should look. And I try to craft my restaurant around my opinion. It's not everyone's, but it's mine. And so things like, I don't like when the chef comes up to you and says, here's this lengthy description of the food, here's how it's going to taste and the textures and all that stuff. When I'm about to eat the food, you don't need to tell me all of that. And so in our restaurant, we try to give the story, but not the description of the food. We're very minimalist and talk about ingredients, and that's it. I like the idea of all-inclusive pricing, tax and tip already included. If it's a $10 drink, it's a $10 drink. It's not 10 plus 20%. Spirit-free drinks are really important to me. If you are in recovery or you're driving or you just don't want any alcohol, wouldn't it be nice if you could have the same quality of drinks as the people who are drinking? You know, your partner gets a fancy cocktail and you get a water, you know? So we work really hard on making our spirit-free drinks as complex as the cocktails, and we charge for it. You know, there's a business decision there too. There's something I can't read there. I don't know what that says. Non-hovering. But we do oh, I know what that says, non-hovering. I knew it would come to me at some point. I don't like when servers hover, like they try to be quiet, but they're still, I just feel like, give me some space. So we definitely non-hover. ADA, and I'll talk about that here and again in a second. I like the intimacy of interacting staff and guests in an authentic way. Anyone who's been to our restaurant, I think, has experienced that. We're not the check-in type of restaurant. How's everything going? No, we want to have a relationship with our diners and let them interact with us in an authentic way as well. And then what I call soft hospitality, we always have umbrellas. We're just waiting for it to rain. It hasn't rained during the dinner service yet because we have all these umbrellas we bought to give people to walk out with an umbrella. We still have them. We also have lint rollers and vegan dental floss. Did you know dental floss wasn't vegan? I didn't, but we have vegan dental floss, so I guess it's not. It must be beeswax. And then wheelchair. This is where I want to come back to the ADA. Our dining room is very purposefully table height, not bar height. I knew I wanted to do that, but here in town there's a restaurant that really cinched it for me. They have a bar height dining area with one seat that's wheelchair height. And I thought, man, if I'm in a wheelchair, how uncomfortable is that? I mean, maybe it's not because you're always in that wheelchair, but why can't, no one's going to complain if you're at table height. Let's take everyone to table height. And so it's the height of our counter, meaning to eat off of, but also to get a wheelchair under is all wheelchair height. That way you have the exact same experience as everyone else. And then the last thing about fine dining's really gone to an extreme of saying, here's the craziest thing I can possibly feed you. Aren't you impressed by how clever and witty I am? I'm bored with it. You know, I did it too. I'm just bored with it. And I think diners are as well. I don't need to serve you ants to have you be impressed. Forage is exotic enough for me when I serve people, I don't know, persimmons. A lot of people have never had a persimmon or a pawpaw. It shocks me how many people haven't had pawpaws. And so that's exotic, but I don't know. I think there's a line that we've crossed many years ago, and it just bores me. So everything I've talked about before can't exist if we don't redefine fine dining. Part of it for us also, though, is that all-inclusive line. That was convenience to the customer, and I want to provide a living wage to my staff. So everyone on my staff is in the $14 to $16 range, and a percentage of the tips. That means my 28-hour-a-week dishwasher is on track for $40,000 a year. That seems excessive for a dishwasher. So she's not a dishwasher, she's a kitchen porter, and we give her all sorts of other jobs. And we do that because I want staff continuity. I want people to not have to take 2 or 3 jobs on to be able to survive. And as the restaurateur, I need to not be so greedy, which I'm not. They have more money than me, but that will change as time goes on. And as you've heard, to me, sourcing ethically over extravagantly is extremely important. This last one, though, drives every single thing we do. Experiencing discovery over the chef's ego. In our kitchen, every night, when we have our staff meeting, we finish it with the word discovery. The idea is, when you come into the restaurant, every one of you will have a different experience than each of the others. And I'm going to give you the easiest example. If you go to the bathroom, if you're a woman, you will see something that the men won't see, most likely. The people who've been there, do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Men don't see it because they stand and face that way. Women sit and face that way. We have a lot of little details that are there because I think they're fun and interesting, and sometimes it's about ethics and whatever. We do a zero paper restaurant. There's some menu stuff, but we even project our menus on the wall. But in the restaurant, we will never talk about those things because the second I get up on stage and present, it's a pedantic relationship. That's not what we're trying to do. It's your experience. We have people come in, they heard they needed to be there because it's on a list, and they have their dinner and they leave. And then there's people like last night, they stayed 3 hours, which I love, except on Sunday night when I'm trying to go home. They stayed 3 hours, and it's just question after question about the history and the research. And I love that. I love that they were that interested in hearing what we were doing. So some of the partnerships, we are working with the Osage Nation. It's really important for me to capture both the histories of the enslaved people of the Ozarks and the indigenous people. And we were fortunate to be introduced to the Director of Cultural Preservation for the Osage Nation. She's in Oklahoma now, but she was in town just last week. The archivist, who I've already mentioned, the Danforth Plant Science Center, SLU, WashU, the Daniel Boone House, Mobot, and at Mobot, the library, the museum, and then the Arch. And there's others. Those are the ones we actively work with. Here's what we do. SLU has given us a history intern. I don't know how many other restaurants have history interns, but we do, and we love it. He doesn't get paid. He's doing it because he's from the Ozarks, and he's fascinated by the topic. And so I step into my doctoral mentor role oftentimes with him, and we talk about publications and research and grants. He just applied for a grant to go study at Harvard at their archives for a week. And so I've supported him in that. At WashU, we work with a few people. The most notable is Natalie Mueller, who is a paleoethnobotanist, who has introduced me to the concept of Anthropocene. I don't know if there's any academics in that world. I don't want to get into a debate about the use of that word. And if you don't know what it is, it's just how humans have interacted with the environment over time and how that's impacted the environment. And then we also work with someone in the landscape architecture division there, or department. Danforth Plant Science Center, they said, we'll be your scientific panel. Anytime you need an analysis of a foraged ingredient, we'll run it through our machines and give you the chemical breakdown, which will tell you nutritional value, toxins, whatever else. Mobot, we have all sorts of resources there. They're constantly reaching out to us. The library is interesting because we've been exploring chinkapin. Does anyone know the chinkapin chestnuts? On the edge of extinction, a couple people are trying to bring them back. We're expecting to get some of the nuts this year from the main person doing that. But to be able to identify chinkapin historically through the research, through drawings that might be in books, will be really useful. And then the rest I've talked about. So how does it all come together? I'm trying to wrap up so we can have some dialogue. We take these old manuscripts, transcribe them because it's back in the day a pretty script where it's oftentimes hard to read. Sometimes we need a little translation like Missouri, and the older stuff looks like Mifouri. Those of us who know the German language recognize that as a double S. We take that, I work with local experts, and by local I mean Ozarks, not St. Louis necessarily. We have people on the ground in Eminence and in the Branson area, Springfield, Fayetteville, Little Rock, which isn't in the Ozarks, and they give us feedback. And then we work with local farmers. The picture in the middle, that was a country store I went through just 2 weeks ago, and they had all these heritage seeds. I stopped, took a picture. I didn't have time to honestly, I had to go to the bathroom, so I couldn't stop and study them, but I took a picture of it, and I'm going to go back and see what seeds there might be of value to us. And then my staff and I, we applied kitchen philosophies, kitchen techniques, and at the end of the day, all that really matters is that the food's good for customers. Otherwise, you won't come back to the restaurant. So here's an example of a dish we're serving right now. A cast iron Floriani grit cornbread, 100% local ingredients, purple hulled peas glazed with fresh sorghum and pot liquor. Pot liquor is the liquid put off when you do your collard greens. Historically, sometimes it's spelled Liquor, which is fun. Roasted sunchoke custard and persimmon wood smoke. Then gratuitous picks while we talk. So yes, I think about how I run my restaurant probably more than most, and it continues to this day. The end. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I could ask you a question for 3 hours probably. Just two. First one is, I presume you are familiar with Catherine Neville of Feast
Oh, yeah.
and her program.
Yeah, I bled profusely on camera for her.
Oh, did you?
She does the Feast TV PBS events with
Yeah.
each episode, and there's one, I think it was the farm to table episode or maybe the foraging episode, and she wanted me to do a demonstration. And I had this Japanese rotary peeler, which is a razor blade that goes back and forth really fast. And she was interviewing me while I was using it, and so I went to take the root vegetable off the peeler, and I hadn't pulled the blade back yet, and sliced my finger really bad. But the show must go on, right? So I just grabbed my finger. I'm bleeding all over the table and answering the questions. So what's your question? Yes, I know, Kat.
Well, the other comment is that we go to the Ariana String Quartet, and Kurt Baldwin said one time about music, how when a musician reads music, that's not the music, it's what you make of the little dots on the paper.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of something that you said earlier about a recipe. And it sounds the same way, that a recipe is a list of things and you make the music with it.
Yeah, I love that concept. And in the research, there's very few recipes. And there's a split off of the answer. Before 1843, there are not recipes. Why 1843? Any food historians? That's when baking powder was introduced. So how do you cook, in 1842, how do you cook meat? You throw it in the pot or throw it on the fire. In 1844, how do you cook meat? You put it in the pot or throw it in the fire. 1842, how do you cook your cornmeal? Has anyone heard of pone? P-O-N-E? That's corn mush fried on a skillet in bacon fat, almost always, or pork fat. In 1844, we have this new invention, because pone, it was good, but it was tough. And all of a sudden we have baking powder, which lightens it up. So someone had to teach us, if you take a cup of cornmeal and a teaspoon, they didn't say teaspoon back then, but a teaspoon of corn powder, or baking powder, it'll lighten up when it fries. It becomes more of a fritter. So there are very few recipes during that time, but even the recipes that we have, well, here's a great example. There's in that scrapbook, I love to talk about the scrapbook. It was 1848 to 1864. Just amazing span of history of this family, one family captured in there. And I was transcribing one of the recipes. And I'm like, I have no idea what this is. And so I started Googling some of the terms in there, because it had things like pork fat and whatever. Very quickly I realized it was shoe polish. They were making their own shoe polish. They called for blackening. Blackening, what is this stuff? I was thinking like a black cake, a fruit cake. So the recipes back then are not of value to me as is. Ovens have changed. How we measure heat has changed. How we process our ingredients has changed. But everything we do that's based on the few recipes we have are certainly not inspired in an artistic way as much as this is how they would have made it. Let's try to be true to it. If I was doing a poem from a recipe, which you can still find those, I would want to make a poem from a recipe, not a corn souffle. Yes, sir.
Every month in St. Louis Magazine, there's a whole page, 3 columns of restaurants that are either closed or opening and so forth. Do you have a theory as to why there's so much? My impression is there's a tremendous amount of turnover in restaurants.
Yeah, I hope I'm on the not closed list.
Is that right? I did too.
But we know the risk. I mean, it's about a 50% failure rate in the first year.
Really?
And I can tell you a lot of reasons, because I'm friends with a lot of the chefs who end up on that list. Being as delicate in my answer as possible, since I'm being recorded, there are people who've never run restaurants before, who don't understand the business behind it. This is me in my first restaurant. Thank goodness I had run enough nonprofit organizations that I understood like basic accounting, setting a budget and maintaining a budget. staffing and all those HR principles and all that stuff. And I think about one in particular. Anyone who follows me on social media knows I love to go out and support the new little guy. Anytime a new restaurant opens, I'm there immediately, and I don't care how the experience is because they're going to make mistakes. And then if it's bad, I wait about 3 months and then I go back. There are people who say, oh, I'm going to wait 3 months. I'm like, they need the money on day one. So go out, let them mess up and practice on you. It's not going to break the bank. And then go back at 3 months, and then you can be a little more discerning. Or 7 months, because we still have slow nights. So this one opened up in the Loop, 3 months ago. I know it's 3 months because 3 months is when the reviews start coming out. And I went there at a month and a half. I was really excited about the concept. And the newspaper article about the restaurant said that the owners, none had worked in a restaurant ever. I hadn't either. So I have a soft spot in my heart for them already. And I got there and like the basics, the basic social contract that a consumer has with a restaurant were not there. No one greeted me when I got to the door. 5 minutes. How many of you would have turned around and walked out at that point? My mom would have. She'd be like, we're going to McDonald's. I waited. Finally, someone came over. Oh, have you been helped? Well, no, otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here waiting in the door. And they said, do you have a reservation? I said, well, your website doesn't have any place for reservations. Oh, no, you need to call in for a reservation. Okay, in 2019, that's not ideal, but okay. So they seated me at the bar. That is fine. I enjoy sitting at the bar. Another 5 minutes till someone came over and gave me a water. It's just, so long story short, it kept going and going and going. Because I like to support them, I was by myself. I ordered 7 menu items. 3 of them were, of the food that came, I got 7 items back. 3 were things I ordered. 4 were things I hadn't ordered. I'm easygoing. My staff wouldn't say it, but when I'm eating at other restaurants, I'm very easygoing. So I ate it, and I ate most of it. Not all of it was good, but again, cut them some slack. When the, beverage manager or whatever came over to check in on me finally, how is everything? I said, everything's fine. I just want to let you know, of these, I only ordered 3. The other 4 are incorrect items. He said, oh, I'm so sorry. I said, it's fine. I get it. It's a new restaurant. If that happened at my restaurant, besides being devastated and probably leaving crying, oh, what have we done? My life choices, still paying student debt. Blah, blah. I do say that all the time. I need to pay off the student loans so I can get over it. I would comp at least the 4 items, if not the 7. And at 7 items, you're not throwing me out a free dessert because we're well beyond dessert phase. They didn't do a single thing. They charged me for the items that I had not ordered. And I'm guessing in their mind, they're like, well, he ate them. Like, yeah, I would have liked the items I had ordered too. So why is that list so long? That is not an uncommon experience. And it's really unfortunate because chefs have huge egos, me included, and restaurateurs, especially if they've been in the business a while, they love to say the customer's right, but then you turn around and they say, they don't know what they're talking about. We do that too. It's a high stress business. And so that's one point. The second one would be much shorter. Everyone wants to draw a salary on day one. You can't do it. But on day one, my salary was my cut of the tips. I'm the only one who had skin in the game. But I could not take a salary because I needed to make sure we were paying our loans, paying our rent, and paying our staff in the reverse order. Here at 7 months, I'm now off the tip pool because I never liked that. It just felt weird. I mean, everyone agreed to it, but I'm off the tip pool, and now I'm $1,000 a month. That's not going to break the bank. We're in it for the long game, and some people are in it for the short game. So we are in a saturated market. Every time I have a job opening, it's next to impossible to get applicants. We just did one for the bar. We had 7 applicants. 1 showed up for the interview. All the chefs say the same thing.
Thank you.
I think there are just too many restaurants in St. Louis.
Yeah.
Really, it's saturated.
Yeah, I agree. Well, if I could do it all over again, which I won't, because at 51 I'm done. This is my last restaurant. I would make sure I was nestled in a neighborhood, and all I would focus on is what do the neighbors want for food. Those are the restaurants that do the best in this town.
You have a theory why so many new restaurants are really noisy? Is that on purpose to get people to switch the tables faster?
Get off my lawn. I'm starting to feel that way more and more. And that and restaurants being too dark. And I walk this line because I read George Mayhew's column as the grumpy old man food critic. And he does not like it bright. He says, if it's too bright, I turn around and walk out. Which is interesting because I can't see the menu. And I always forget my readers. And even if I had them, I was at Taste last night. I'm holding the candle. Finally, I pulled my cell phone and turned the flashlight on, which is a little embarrassing. I don't really care, except it brightens the room. And I'm like, I don't even know what to order. I can't see it. They have different perspectives of what a restaurant should be. And I think when they get older, they'll stop that.
Your pictures are so interesting. Could you tell us what is in each one of them?
Sure. Top left, that is an entree that's currently on our bar menu. It's a piece of pumpkin, Mosquito Provence, or the fairy tale pumpkin roasted. You'll see I like very pure flavors. I don't like manipulating things much. That has ground elk. We also do a tempeh version. We make our own tempeh. The white stuff is yogurt. We make our own yogurt and then drain it all the way till it's like cheese. Pepitas, a bunch of seasonal pickles, and farro grain wheat berries. We do blue emmer from Rick Davis at Oakland Farms, who grows exclusively for us. He's a very, very small farm. The center top is huitlacoche or corn smut. It's the fungus that ruins corn crops, that if farmers ever realized we would pay much more for that than the corn, they could make some more money. The top right is chanterelles, but they're specifically cinnabar chanterelles, mushrooms that we gathered one day. You can see the regular chanterelles up in the corner. Down the bottom left, that's, I think, one of the most beautiful flowering chanterelle mushrooms I've ever harvested, and tasted good too. The center is a dish that you've had many times. It's off our menu now, but there's our vegetarian dish. That's a German pancake with the Floriani grit cornmeal, roasted seasonal vegetables, and sorghum butter. It was yummy. It's a really good dish. And then the last is just a picture of our lounge, which is an area in between the dining room and the bar, where you start to see the level of detail that we do, including that table, which is a local sycamore tree. They're called crotch cuts, so where the tree branches out, cut that. And our architect had that wood and turned it into a table. And I said, I want you to bore 6 holes in that wood. And they had a heart attack. What do you mean? It's this gorgeous piece of wood. You're going to ruin the wood. I said, I'm the customer, and I have a different artistic vision for it. And then we took some more of the wood from the sycamore and put it on is it a lathe? The spinners? Or the spinners that you can, anybody know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. And we lathed these, they look like huge golf tees, but they're meant to be plate holders. And then we can present food on that. I think the funny thing is, a lot of people don't understand, when we say Ozark cuisine, they think they're going to get like Cracker Barrel. And so they come in, and this table always reminds me at Cracker Barrel, you get the game with the golf tees that you have. I'm like, it's kind of like an adult golf tee game. Yeah, in the back first.
You meant, because the menu changes out with the season, is there a certain season that you're like really looking forward to making food with, or have made food with it? You haven't been a full year yet, so I'm not
Yeah, but my last restaurant, we did the same thing. It's just I didn't have a staff there. We love that August, September, October period. There's just so much. I like January, February because there's nothing, and it really pushes you. But we've been open 7 months and we've come up with 59 new courses already. We're not seasonally driven, we're ingredient driven. And I think it's going to be fun here. We've done so much canning, preserving, dehydrating. All these misos we're making, they're all getting to that point where they're starting to get good. And that's good because that's all we're going to have very quickly. We'll be able to still get the pumpkins, the butternuts, the vegetables that store well. But it's how do you make those interesting when every restaurant's using those? But start watching everyone's menus, and all of a sudden, that's not the driving force. Then all of a sudden, you have whatever ingredient that's being grown in a greenhouse. And we just don't do that. So it's how do you make a pumpkin delicious in 20 different ways so your customer doesn't get bored?
Will you be moving forward the same ideas and philosophies for your cafe?
Oh, so Squatters Cafe. We did, my sous chef and I wanted to keep him on payroll because this took so long. And we opened up Squatters Cafe at KDHX a year and a half ago and ran that purposely just for 1 year. That's when we closed so we could open this new place. And the philosophies are there except for the history and the forage. So it's still 100% locally sourced, 100% made in-house, ethically sourced, all that stuff. But I don't care about the history there, and I'm not wasting I don't mean it that way, but I'm not wasting my forage there because it's too precious for me at Bulrush, and there's not enough to do 2 restaurants. But for example, our biscuits and gravy, which we served at the old, will be at the new, and it's still every single ingredient in there, except for the salt, is local. Yeah, we're looking forward to that. That soft opening is Wednesday, and the hard opening, I think, is the week after. But we're just doing food. We're a wholesaler at that point. Blueprints running the show.
And where is that?
It's at the corner. Well, it's by Urban Chestnut on the corner. It's the new Hilo property that the Kransberg Art Foundation is opening. It's a written word performance center, which is really cool. They have over 100 written word events already on the books, and they haven't even opened yet. And all these written word nonprofits are already moved in upstairs into the lofts. It's going to be the epicenter for written word stuff in town. It's really, really cool. And there's going to be Blueprint coffee on the bottom, so we can get good coffee in that district now.
You've used the word miso. I always presumed, I guess, that it was only a Japanese broth. It's more than that, evidently.
It's a paste that's thinned out into a broth in that context. Traditionally, miso is soybean that's been inoculated with the koji spores. The koji breaks it down. You salt it. The salt pulls all the moisture out, and now you have a salty, funky soybean paste. But you can do that with all sorts of stuff. But it's the paste is the miso. When you eat at the Japanese restaurant, you're getting a miso soup. We have a lot of people, customers say, you seem very Asian influenced in your menu. We absolutely are. My sous chef and I just both love Asian cuisine of all sorts, not just Japanese. Yes?
I read about a green recently, and I don't know if it was pokeweed or what, but it's poisonous, but people in the Appalachian would boil it, throw the water away, and boil it. Was it
3 times, poke.
It is.
Yeah. And we always clarify it's toxic, not poisonous. Because you will get sick if you eat it raw, but it won't kill you. And yeah, that's exactly the process. It's 3 boils. So boiling water, drop it in, pour it off. Boiling water, drop it in, pour it off. Do that 3 times, open lid, which is interesting. And then it's good to go. Then you throw it in your pan with some bacon fat and salt, and it's super yummy.
How many people do you have that forage?
It's just my team.
I
Yeah.
mean, like 20 people? Or?
No. Oh no. I wish. I mean, payroll wise, I don't wish, but my sous chef does the vast majority of foraging, and I have a bar cook in the back that people don't see. But there's 6 of us on the team, and everyone is invited to forage. My sous chef is required to forage, but he would do that whether I required it or not.
Do you serve desserts?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, pastry is my specialty. So, yeah, I like our desserts. But we only normally have one thing for the bar, one thing for the dining room, because we're 2 sections. And then I do acorn macarons always. And then I make chocolates. Even that, though, I'm kind of phasing out because I don't have time. Chocolates take a lot of work, but yeah, sorry you didn't know that, did you? Chocolates are gone for a little bit. I'm going to do them seasonally for holidays.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody.